You might have noticed that we had another person on our flyer, but he couldn't come. And we actually have the founding partner of Sizemore Group, Michael Sizemore. He founded the company in 1974. He's a Georgia Tech graduate, but then he's, I think, our previous guest was a landscape architect, and we have an urban designer among us. He got that degree from Carnegie Mellon University. And he's also the architect of, I think it's not only one library building, right?
The library building and the student center.
Okay, so he's the architect of those buildings, and our library was the first building in Georgia which used passive.
Passive solar heating. Yeah, that building is daylighted, except the people that operate it won't turn the lights off. Because if they turn the lights off, some students will come up and say, hey, your lights are burned out. So they eventually got tired of doing that, so they leave the lights on.
So because of his, work in the energy planning for building, he actually became a fellow, awarded a fellowship, position of fellowship.
The College of Fellows.
Okay. Okay, and then the company actually did the planning of the 1996 Olympics, and they actually did a lot of community development projects in the Atlanta, and they received the Urban Land Institute Award for their smart growth design in Smyrna Town Center. If you remember, Tom Walsh was talking about that. And he said that one of the groups will be talking, but he actually had that example. And I think a lot of you visited the Smyrna Town Center. So now we're going to hear about their office's approach for urban design, a couple of examples that they have realized, and also what they expect from employees in the urban design area. Okay. Well,
Right
thanks
after
so
he's
much
showing how
for
we want
joining
to
us.
advance this.
Oh, you might click on it, but you can just use this back.
Yeah, stick with that.
Is it okay
Yeah.
for you, or do you want to?
So I understand you're interested in knowing what's the difference between urban design and architecture. And so I'd be happy to talk about that. Actually, it's kind of a profound question within the profession, which isn't solved very well very often. So in urban design, the first thing is that I have seen two ways urban design is used as a term. One is what I would actually call urban decorating, where streetscapes get new ways of sitting in trees and fountains and things like this. I call that urban decorating. There's another way of looking at urban design, which is our way, which I think is the predominant way. It's the way of your professors, with the little experience I've had with them, which is that as soon as you say the word urban, you're into complexity. When you're into urban, you have a lot of things that can affect what you're doing. When you're doing architecture, and when I studied my architecture degree, and when you studied your architecture degree, probably what you're going to do is you'll learn to design a building for a client on a site, and you'll probably not get involved in politics. You probably just keep your head down, design a building for your site, and hope it works out around you. If you're going to get involved in urban design, these change. First thing that happens is that you don't have one building to concern with. You have a building maybe within a context of other buildings, or you're designing several buildings. And as soon as you start to have more than one building, you particularly have an opportunity to use sculptural form to enable those buildings to relate to each other and to become much more than they would have been. You can't very well establish an urban space, a park, for example, with one building. You have to have two sides, edges, to define the public space. So as you get involved in urban design, it creates the opportunity to use three dimensions, sculptural forms, to create a different overall environment in the context with other buildings as well. So already it's getting more complex. In addition, you do need to understand some of the politics of what's going on. And in fact, what you really need to know is what is behind the politics, what's causing this politics to be the way it is. So you could be having a field day right now, political campaigns that are going on, speculating what's behind the people who vote for one candidate versus another. What are they really looking for? It would be an interesting studio problem for you all to go design a settlement for Donald Trump. What would that look like? We know he owns casinos, Trump Towers, so on. Then go design a community for Bernie Sanders, lives in Vermont. And what you have to do in urban design is deal with these kinds of issues on a larger scale. You don't have a client in urban design oftentimes. Now, when you talk to Perkins and Will, where they're doing things in Abu Dhabi and there's a dictator ahead of the whole thing, the dictator can say, I want it like this, and do it like this. In the United States, when we do town centers, we have to deal with a community, a real honest-to-God community. And we have to find out, what does that community want? There's going to be a lot of people, a lot of different views, so you need to have methods to find out what overall is being required here. What's their aspiration? We have a number of communities in North Atlanta where they've tried to recreate themselves, such as Smyrna, which we did, and I'll show you some of that, or Roswell, or Alpharetta, where they're doing city halls, and the idea is to create this back to the future look. This, it's really kind of the community which we had that we could brag about now, because we used to have this kind of community over here. And so we'll build the kind of community we wish we had, if we could have had it, when we could have had it. And then we'll go back to it now. It's kind of like if you don't have much money, you build a mansion, you say, well, I came from this mansion. So there's kind of this stage setting operation gets going on, and it's led by these aspirations of the community. How they want to appear, how they want to look. So you got a lot of people involved in this, and a key idea I would pass on to you is you start understanding that design has consequences. If you do something here, it might affect somebody there, which could be a good thing for them, it could be a bad thing for them. What they're doing might be something that would help your client. So you really want to be aware of the consequences and keep that in mind. And instead of doing a building like architecture, you start to do the building, build the building, turn it over to the client. You have a process. I've been working with Smyrna for 25 years, reviewing what they're doing, and the problems keep going along. So it's distinctly different, and it's a very dynamic process. It's a more inclusive process. Particularly, it has consequences. And when I had gotten my degree in urban design, there are only 3 programs in the country that actually gave urban design degrees. And at the time, we had to take courses in urban sociology, urban economics, market analysis, transportation, a number of different areas. So again, it gets into the larger kind of picture, the larger kind of consequences. So you're operating with a lot of different connections you have to make, a lot of different consequences that are going on. And so the key to the approach that we've used, which has now been adopted by a lot of other firms, and was an approach we used for some of the Olympics, was first to listen and learn what is the will of this community, where are they going, where do they want to go, where do they want to be. Secondly, do a beautiful, realistic master plan. And then thirdly, do the design, be the architect of the key buildings that are going to set the standard. Because when you do a plan, no one believes it. And the only way that you can start to get the plan to really take off is if you actually show them, show people, build something that says, here's a new level we're going to operate at. And it's worked a number of times for us. And then if you do that, then you attract others who want to be a part of it. Probably private sector money, institutions, and so on. And then once you go through that process there, you repeat it, you do the same thing again. So I'll show you some examples here of how this plays out. This is, as you can tell, the Centennial Olympic Park, which we master planned. And then while we were at it, we also designed the Metro Chamber of Commerce building here with the dome on top, with the idea that we would provide a lot of excitement, and it certainly did do that. But one of the key ideas here, going back to beyond the obvious building, was that we had the Georgia World Congress Center. You look at the top left aerial view. Down to the lower left is the Georgia World Congress Center. Over here to the right, just off of the illustration, is Peachtree Street. So one of the problems with the Georgia World Congress Center is they needed a way to get people, conventioneers, to feel comfortable about going from Peachtree, where the hotels were, to the Georgia World Congress Center. And at the time, this was a no man's land to walk in. So the idea was to create a park to draw them halfway to the World Congress Center. And by the time they got there, they create a sense of entry into the Georgia World Congress Center. So there was a very big political, economic reason why this park was in the location. The other reason was the International Olympic Federation required it. And then there are other agendas that came up. The community, the city would like to have a park for its community. So all these played into this, and then they played into the form that I put it into, which is, you'll see that the building in the lower left with the yellow around it, that's the Chamber of Commerce, existing chamber plus the addition. And basically it's a shape of an arrowhead. It's pointing at Peachtree Road. So that shape was to help make that transition occur. Then if you have that shape, what do you do with it from a form standpoint? This cylindrical form then anchors that point. And since we did that 20 years ago, I see this on shopping centers and multifamily. But anyway, the corner became a key place to set that anchor and to draw people in. Back to consequences again. If you're designing the key building in the plan that you did, you can play the two off each other so that not only do you get the effect from the exterior framing the park, but you get a view from the inside looking out at the park, which is, this is inside that cylinder where the Chamber of Commerce members look out across the park. It's quite a spectacular view. So we were able to play one off the other and make them work better. And then, of course, the side of the chamber started to create an edge for the park. Another example on a much smaller scale, there were some of the similar ideas, is this is a crown room, Concord C, Hartsburg, Jackson. According to Delta, it's the best in the world. And when we did this, we started with the same approach as saying, well, what are these people lacking? So we started looking at it and realized you're in an airplane, it's always moving, it's always vibrating, you're in the air. And so the counterbalance to that would be something stable, on the ground, earth-like materials. They'd go right up the walls to create this sense of stability, to quiet things down, and to keep some of the noise out. So we're trying to provide the opposite of what they have, and it was very, very successful. But it's the same attitude of trying to find out what's the real issue here. Not the latest style, but how do we fill in what's missing from this group of people? Okay, up at a bigger scale, the aerial view of Smyrna Town Center. In the planning world, you will usually see two-dimensional views looking at plans, flat, graphic. There's very often no sense of three dimensions. there is oftentimes, usually, no sense that they could use the shape of these buildings to enclose spaces. It's been amusing to me occasionally. I've said to planners, well, show me, if you cut through that main street there, draw me a sketch of how big is that space? What's it feel like in the space? And to find they couldn't do it. So this is a real distinction between planning and urban design. Urban design, you have sculpture you can use, and you can, the forms and distances and proximity becomes very, very important. University of North Carolina Graduate School of Planning did a study, and they found out that 80% of people looking at a site plan have no idea what they're looking at. So 3 dimensions is how we always operate, and we even get a little nervous about having our clients look at these kinds of images, even though this is an aerial, because you really don't get a sense of what's it like on the ground, what's it like to be on the ground occupying these spaces. So this is what's much more important, is the character you're creating there. One of the things that you can do to create a sense of harmony, for example, this particular community needed, again, a sense of stability, of history, of familiarity, some degree of classicism to it. And so we've got the same materials being used all throughout the public, and even the private uses some of the same materials too, to provide that consistency. And so what you see here is the library, public safety building, and the community center, and they all tie together. And as you look out of the windows, that may be curved windows, you look at the curved forms of the master plan as well. So it really ties together and it really integrates together. And then subsequently at the top, you got the Market Village, which is done by private sector with design guidance by myself and my firm. And one of the things about urban design is you can blow it in any number of ways. Because while the buildings create the sense of enclosure in the sculptural forms, you got to get the details right. And the reason you got to get the details right is that when people walk through a community down the sidewalk, they're not looking up at the tops like architects like to do. They're looking at the sidewalk because they don't want to fall over and trip. So what goes on the ground, it's about 80% of the time people are looking on the sidewalk, a fair amount. Of course, you all look at cell phones. But nevertheless, you got to get the sidewalk right. It can't be an obstacle course. It can't be too elaborate and all kinds of colors. If you did a very active sort of pattern here, who would look in the storefronts? You'd be busy looking down at all the stuff going to the sidewalk, whereas the intention is to sell things. Here's another sort of standalone kind of architectural project. However, it is still planned so that, as in the top right shows, it can extend down that one edge to try and create another town center. So while it's one building to start with, it lays the groundwork for the next buildings to continue, and it lays the groundwork so that shopping can occur. When I talk about form, one of the things I've learned, this is some sculpture I've done, is that all living things have direction and speed. You can sculpt a leaf and make it look like a piece of paper, no life in it. A leaf actually has direction, it grows, has speed, the curves, the shapes go faster or slower. And so there's a possibility with sculptural forms of direction and speed. And when that's incorporated into architecture, the architecture can get much more interesting. Here's another sculpture, very directional. And here's a building that I did while I was doing the sculpture, which is the Riverdale City Hall, which has a good bit of direction too. This building was very small. I think it was 15,000 square feet, but it had to have a big impact. So one of the ways of achieving that is to use direction and speed. Get it dynamic, make it energetic. So that is a method that you can use in the urban environment. When you have more than one building, you can frame these views of the other buildings and get this. For example, this building at the top, actually, the shape of that with the low parts extending energetically out, and then the curve on the top actually came from a statue that was more or less like this. And so the forms work their way into this building, and this has become quite a popular building there. And once again, we have the green space, the amphitheater, contained by a couple of buildings, and then it's part of a bigger picture for further development. And this has been sort of the, not necessarily formula, but this has been how we've often worked, is the building and the key space. And here is the same building I showed you, except with an idea for a sculpture on the top that we photoshopped in. So these work together. This is more a reminder to me, it's an extreme example for you of the idea of proximity, the anthropometrics of architecture when you get into a pedestrian environment. What I mean by that is we have evolved very, very slowly. And as much as we might like to think we've made a lot of changes, our relationships with other people and objects and spaces, shapes, forms, basically the same as it's been several tens of thousands of years. So what that means is, for example, people walk about 3 feet a second. They have an attention span of 8 seconds. So if you're walking along the storefront on Main Street and you come to an area that's longer than 24 feet and there's nothing going on, the tendency is to look at your watch and say, oh, I was supposed to be at home by now. And so you'll hesitate, stop, not go to the next shops. And so one of the things you'll see is when you go to a mall, you'll see that it's well managed. The stores that are vacant will have something in the window. It's interesting because they don't want to lose you in the path. So what all this means is you have that speed and that attention span is not going to change anytime soon. Similarly, the ability to recognize somebody's expression and their attitude, limited to that's about 65 feet. So if you go to a theater, you want to sit within 65 feet of the stage. If you can't, you're not going to be able to quite pick up as well what's going on. If you're building a Main Street, you want to be 85 feet from sidewalk to sidewalk. And one of the reasons for that is you can recognize people 85 feet away, and then it gets a little bit more remote. So there are these guidelines that we pretty much act towards. That would be another thing you would want to learn in the process. So this is dealing with the problem of proximity and how close can you be. And of course, in this case, 65 feet was surpassed right down there. And from there on, you have giant screens in the background. So as you get into urban design, you're really concentrating usually on the pedestrian point of view, and you'll have to do a little technical research. So I think that's the end. I think we still have a good bit of time left. We can talk, whatever you'd like.
Yeah, do you want to talk about the things that you want to see in the employees?
Yeah, oh, excuse me. Forgot that part of
the
it.
design area.
Yeah. Because we're doing the planning and the architecture too, we need, and also because we, in terms of our competitive edges and what we're about, is we are very much implementation oriented. We tend to stay away from master plans which we don't think are going to go anywhere. As architects, we really want to follow on and do the buildings. And so we like to have young architects working with us who understand architecture, the buildings, the realism of buildings, how do you get the garbage out, things we don't like to start with. And we want to have people who really understand the architecture, so their plans will be more realistic. And then what comes out of that is that we tend to want architects who have both a master's degree in architecture and a master's degree in in planning, or urban design ideally. So that way we can cover both. We've had planners work with us occasionally, and with our approach it didn't work very well. Although one became president of the Sierra Club, so I guess that was a good contribution. But so that's what we're looking for. And in terms of computers, we've been able to get pretty far in the planning world with SketchUp. As you get further into the other programs, it tends to get a little bit sticky and a little bit more specific, or a certain amount of advantage at a larger scale at being a little ambiguous. So SketchUp, you already all know how to do SketchUp very well at this point. We'll then go into Revit for more rendering type purposes, but that's about all we're using. Now, when you talk to Perkins and Will, for example, I think you're going to see big massive things that are really spectacular, that will be much, much more involved on huge type of developments. So that's probably appropriate for them. But for us doing, having some degree of dedication to small communities, we don't need to go into all that. Although recently we've been using the 3D goggles, which, how many of you are using those now, 3D goggles? No one's using them yet? Well, basically, you have a little control here, it directs where you're going a little bit, and then if you look up, it compensates by helping you look up, and you see what's on the upper part. We do 3D modeling of building. Our architectural activities are with Revit, and we get much more involved, more detailed there. So we have the 3D model you can walk through of the buildings, but with the goggles, you walk around like this, and it's following you. You look up high and push the button very high, and you go through the roof, and you're standing on the edge looking over the side at the drop-off. And so it's really powerful. It's fantastic. So I see us using a lot of that. Yes.
There's no licensure that you're requiring, right?
No,
License
no.
or
We'd like new people to
certificates.
be intending to become a member of the APA and become a certified planner by them, and or a registered architect, ideally both. But you can do pretty well without the AIA part of it. I mean, the registration of the architect.
Any questions, comments?
So,
Yes, ma'am.
locally, I see that you're involved in architecture under planning. How much do you complete, like, all the stages of the architecture, or more just like the outside, the skin, and then an architect goes in and does that?
That's a really good question, because it happens both ways a lot of times. And so sometimes we might get involved doing the massing diagrams, the sense of what it should look like, design guidelines, and then somebody else might do the project. Depending on the talent or who picks it up for the follow-on, it's going to be good or not. Design guidelines are not going to save the project. It might keep it from being awful, but it's probably not going to really create a great project. It still takes talent for somebody to design buildings to get them to fit in. So occasionally we'll do that. We've written a bunch of design guidelines, and that's in our background. But more usually what we do is we take it through full construction documents, through interiors, and even sometimes we select the artwork. So we really take it all the way in, because in the end you can lose the quality of what you're doing at many points along. But again, that's if you're you know, depending how good a project is, if you're working with private developers predominantly, you can do a lot of almost good stuff. But if you're working with a community and you're designing their one and only in history town center, they can be much more picky about what you're doing. So you really have a lot of eyes on what you're doing. Yes, sir.
I guess you kind of mentioned it once already, but I guess how courageous or how bold are you in terms of creating forms staying to the surrounding area? How do you make that decision? Following realities, because one building out currently kind of inspired by sculpture, right? Which might not necessarily do with the area, the
Right.
form you're decision. How do you kind of manage to make that suggestion that this is the perfect form, it might not conform to the area, but yet it is really fabulous? How do you do
Yeah,
it?
that's a really good question. I wanted to contrast Smyrna, which is a very staid, things on axis, calm design, which sure is what they want. With Riverdale, which is predominantly African community, they don't want to go back to the past. They don't want to go into the first. They want something progressive. So then the question came up, what's that? And the other thing they wanted to do was they wanted to show themselves as not only progressive, but energetically progressive. They were heading for the future. Really, they wanted a very energetic sort of look. So I started thinking about energetic forms, and a pretty simple gesture for an energetic form is that. So it's actually kind of a, and so it's kind of a tool that I had previously done sculpture like that.
On top of that, how would you navigate kind of getting the client on board? You know, if you wanted to do something kind of like you were saying, and they're kind of resistant, do you kind of give way to them, or do you kind of try to convince them to go a little further with it? I mean, is there kind of a fine line between that? Or is it...
That's another really good question, because that often is a really profound choice. And so what, in the architecture profession right now, we've had this dichotomy between the architects, which is if you want to hire Gary, you're going to need a pretty good chance what you're going to get. And so you're buying the signature of the game. The other approach, the one we use, is more, we're trying to integrate this with the community's wishes. And so we will do a lot of character preference surveys with them, push a lot of images to see where they're going, and what they'd like to be. And that really helps us. And then when we do this, sometimes we will put it on social media and get hundreds of thousands of votes. So you really start getting an idea where they're going. It's very helpful. And that actually is pretty exciting. One of the exciting things we had was the city of Alpharetta wanted to do in the city hall. So they did that in hundreds of photographs. And of the top 5 in the public, 3 of them were done by our firm. So that was pretty good. So to answer your question, we try and go with where the community is going. And sometimes it is very difficult, because you have to do maybe a lot of alternatives to zero in on this what this should be.
I think that's a really good point, because within the urban design projects, you have to include the community. You need to actually get the approval from the community to continue with the project. And I think, the way that you sample, and then, the method that Mr. Sizemore talked about is you actually, as a company, you select images and then present to the community and say, would you like something like this or like that? What is the atmosphere and the sense of place that you want to have in that area? And I think the nature of the process is defined by your own approach, right? You're going to actually select the example that you think fits the best. And maybe another company might select, other examples. So I think that's, one way of integrating your wishes, but including the community to vote back and have their own preferences.
One of the things that we do, that might be a little unusual, is we use it as, the images as a springboard. And so we'll say, okay, how many would give this an A? How many gives it a B, and so on. So you see all these people who voted one way or the other, and you say to them, okay, all you that gave it an A, why did you give it an A? What is it you like so much about this? Or D, or F. And that's when you really hit paper. That's when you really find out what's going on in these people's minds. And it's fascinating to see what architects think is important compared to what a community thinks is important. We'll have a beautiful building and in front there's a trash can. They'll ignore the beautiful building and they'll put a damn trash can. And so you really, or the typical modern architecture, the wonderful modern architecture, all the young staff are all enamored, wait till they see this. Probably goes, F, terrible, horrible. Well, okay, well, why is this? Where's the front door? How do you get in that building? It'll kill these folks. So it's very instructive to do that. And I really recommend the second part of it is using it as a springboard, not the final answer.
And I think in this context, another important thing is when working with the community and opening it up to their preferences, the funding and the economy might be an issue, right?
Absolutely.
So they might want to
Absolutely.
do things that they can't afford, like the example in the McPherson area.
Yeah.
It's a low-income area. They wanted to have Whole Foods, and then their political representative says, we don't have the economic power here for a Whole Foods. And there are actually tools for that as well. Like there's a gate process that gives every individual, this is your budget, and some kind of a representational, money in chips or stickers, and they actually go and spend their money so they can actually finish their money before they get everything they, want. So I think the economy becomes an important issue, and within the, participation processes, there are tools to mitigate.
Yeah, and as you're saying, it's pretty damn complicated. And let me comment on that for a minute, because you're all pretty young and trying to figure out what you're going to do, what you want to do, and so on. If you chose to be in urban design, you could always do the urban decoration approach, which is usually landscape architects do that. But if you want to be an urban designer like the kind I'm describing here, your life is going to be complicated, more complicated than you want. And you're going to have to live with ambiguity and lack of clarity because it's complicated. You're dealing with a lot of human beings, and they, you know how wild it is. So it's not a way to a nice, simple, go in your studio and spend a day, go home, and it's not one of those kind of situations necessarily. Usually there are meetings with communities, breakfasts with communities, going to weddings and communities. The other alternative for you is I'm going to be an architect, I'm design really great buildings, and I'm going to do the production documents for those buildings, and I'm going to get the building done. That is complicated enough by itself, but it's probably not going to be as complicated as if you want to do urban design. So do a little self-searching before you make that decision as to what lies ahead.
Yeah, I think in terms of the complication, we actually watched the Urbanized documentary and the Route 21 in Germany, Stuttgart, right? So there was this huge project for the central station, and there was a park with trees, 200 years old trees, and the people, after Second World War, they were in needle wood, and they didn't even touch the trees, and this new project was gonna take it off. And then it was going to demolish the historic building. So there were protests against and for the project. So I think that was an interesting kind of a scene for the students to see. It is complicated. There are so many stakeholders, different wishes and wants.
some good news about getting into urban design with an architectural background is sometimes you have some secret weapons there, which is you can visualize and express how something could be, with renderings or the drive-through and that sort of thing. So life in the end is a matter of choices. And so, for example, with the tree issue, you got people on both sides. Well, you can actually influence that, as many of you probably already found out, with some incredible vision of what would happen if you did either A or B. Or can you keep the trees and do something absolutely incredible on the edges? One of the things I've learned is a great lesson. It gets back to the economics of the situation. A park space increases value around it if you plan it properly to take advantage of it. And so when we have clients say, oh my God, all that land we're going to set aside for green space, and how are we going to pay for it? It could have been 4-story apartments or something. I say, well, put the 4-story apartments around the edge. Then you'll have something terrific and it'll increase the value. There was a study done at SMU's Graduate School of Business in which a guy was hired by some real estate developers to lay out a city that would provide the most money for them. And they said, what you need to do is you need to put parks in, because for every 400 feet from the park, 500 feet from the park, the value, and they had researched this, the value is going to be 20% higher. The rent will be 20% higher, sales price will be 20% higher, because people are going to walk the park with the kids and so on. So what you want to do is lay out your park so you always have 400 feet to a park. Well, the city of Dallas was planning this giant park, and they said it's only going to benefit that little strip around the edge if you do that. So you're better off to plan a bunch of small parks, and you'll make more money. Well, also you make more money because it's more valuable, it's more useful, more people have access to a park. So it's been proven that's a great approach. Now how you sell that's how it gets complicated. Yes, ma'am.
My question, I guess, has to deal with, like, we kind of know the process of like how going through a building works. You have design development, schematic, et cetera, but like for an urban project where there's multiple buildings that you might end up designing and stuff like that, it's like, what's that kind of like process you have to go through? I can imagine takes like a really long time.
Well, sort of what I shorthand calling our formula really does work, which is you talk to them, see where they're coming from, show them some images that you're talking about something like this, or other communities. What communities do you admire? What communities would you be like? Now, always be careful. You'll be limited by how much travel they do. But you try and get an idea where they're coming from. Then you try and use some words or some example images to pin it down and see. Is that what you're talking about? The next piece is you put together a plan that reflects what they're looking for. And again, you show it to them again. And before you show it to them, you say, now here's what we said last time. These are the characteristics you wanted. And here in this scheme is the characteristic. We don't go, bam, there it is. Everybody fall down. What we try and do is say, okay, you wanted this. Okay, here's a scheme that has this. You wanted that. Here's a scheme that does this. So we walk people through what they had told us they wanted. And then once you get that vision kind of in place, then the next step becomes more like architectural programming, architectural design, where you're going to come out with, okay, this is what's going to get the ball rolling and show you're serious. And I always say, I'm convinced of this, if you're working with a community who's not too hot and they want to be hot, then whatever the first thing is you do, it better be real hot to get the ball rolling and to establish that level. Because no developer is gonna come in, if you've done a C plus city hall, they're not gonna come in and do an A whatever. You do an A city hall, they'll probably come to you and ask, how can I do an A development? Actually has been a Smyrna. When we first got it done, developers came to us and said, how can we replicate what you've done here? Not beat us over the head, it's how do we have that success? So that's kind of the approach, but in the meantime, every one of these steps here is susceptible to who knows what. But you got your mind is thinking, you know, the different alternatives, you can put together reasons for doing what you're doing. So you always have that going for you.
Last comments, questions? Well, thanks so much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the chance to try and articulate. Good luck on the subject.
Thank you, guys.